Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, Katie and I are going to be talking about how we plan to talk to our children about sex and how we've already talked to our children about sex. And this is actually going to include kind of a brief history on how our parents talk to us about said subject. I don't know if I want to say the word again. We are excited, though, to talk about this because I think we feel like we've got so much to learn and we don't want to run away from the scariness or the daunting aspect of this conversation. We want to really lean into it and embrace the role that we have in our children's life, especially in this area. So hopefully we can encourage you to do the same with you and with your children. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a rating or a review on iTunes. And if you're watching it on YouTube, we would love it if you subscribed to this channel and if you were able to like the video on YouTube as well. Let's get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Okay, so when Elisha brought up this idea this afternoon about this topic, I was excited about it because we have been talking about this quite a bit as our children get older and more curious, and you start hearing the average ages that kids get exposed to things or kids hear about things, and you realize, wow, that's like right now. That is our 6-year-old. Yeah. And I think that as a parent, especially with something as crucial as, God's sexual design, you want to be the first one in line to talk to them about this. Because I was just reading, one of our favorite books, when your child is 6 to 12, and they were just saying the importance of when you are the first one to tell your child about something, then that shapes their perception of the truth. And then they compare everything else they hear to that truth that you shared with them first. So kind of whatever your child is exposed to first, they kind of see as the truth. And it's not that that can't be erased down the road, but it's kind of what they initially black and white think is the standard. And then they compare everything else to that standard. And so as parents, we want to be the first ones to share God's standard for sex and sexuality, and then let everything else be seen in that light, rather than pick up a bunch of different ideas here or there and be comparing them to what? Like we live in a very sexually confused world, and we don't want our children to be confused about something that can be an incredible blessing in their lives.
Yeah, it's so interesting how this is, like you said, it's been an ongoing conversation for you and I, and I mean, very recently too. This morning, last night, you and I stayed up way too late, stressing out about how we're going to talk to our kids, on the subject going forward. And I think that's a really good perspective to have, Katie, is that we want to be the initiators of conversations, of these types of conversations in our home. And we want to put ourselves in a position to be the first people our kids go to with questions, with, embarrassing thoughts, with uncomfortable thoughts, with, unfortunate situations they find themselves in. We want us to be the first person they think to go to. And I think even having that mindset makes you realize, oh, this is a journey. Like this is how we tell them about sex and then we're good. This isn't okay, we put these filters on our computer or we don't let them have a smartphone and we're good. I really think this is, like so many subjects, this is certainly one of those subjects and areas of life where it is an ongoing journey. And we want to journey with our kids through this. And I know that's what my dad did with me, and I'm really grateful for that. And I know I've had that expectation as a father to do that with my sons, and my daughter or daughters, if we have any more. And I will say I'm a bit surprised with how soon that journey's starting, though.
Yeah, I know. I think it's starting sooner with each generation. I mean, I kind of feel like it's about as young right now as it can be when it comes to comprehension and stuff like that. I don't know if you can get much younger with how early our children are exposed to things or explained things. I think oftentimes the peers and what peers are learning define how soon our children learn about things. And even though I would say most of our friends are delaying their children's education sexually somewhat compared to the public school system. The public school system still is setting the standard for there's a lot of kids running around that are very, very knowledgeable at a preschool kindergarten level. And so that therefore is the standard that we're dealing with.
Yep.
Is a lot of very knowledgeable children at a very young age, and knowledgeable in a very confused way where they don't really know what is right and what is wrong, or what is God's design and what is a twisted version of that. They just know a lot of facts, and we need to be clear on which one of those are healthy and what of those are not healthy. And going to kind of like our goal when it comes to sexual education of our children, Elisha and I were talking about this, and I was like, did you ever feel shame in sex, in married sex? Because that's also something on a flip side of maybe a very overeducated culture as a whole. Then some of our peers felt maybe very underprepared for healthy marital sex, or maybe they felt shame around it because of what they were taught or not taught. And we both felt very blessed to be like, no, we've never felt any shame sexually.
Yeah.
And like, what a gift that is. That's something that I want our children to have going into marriage, to know this is a beautiful thing. This is God's design. This is a delight. This is a joy. This is intended for pleasure. And it's nothing to be ashamed of or scared of or thought of as this dirty thing. It's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah.
And our parents gave us that vision for sex.
Exactly. That is a huge takeaway from both of our upbringing that, I'd love to emulate that amongst other aspects of how I was educated on this topic. From my perspective, sex was introduced to me very late in life, where I was already starting to, hear things, learn things, research things, on my own before my dad initiated that conversation. And I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. I just think that's a common thing for parents. Like I think that I so have the potential to do the exact same thing with my son, even now as a 6-year-old, for me to be like, oh, certainly I don't need to bring that up. And like you said, it just seems like each generation is blown away with how much their children know, what the next generation knows. And, but I will say, regardless of that, maybe you might even call it a mistake, of my dad introducing various concepts to me and not being the one that initiate the conversation. He was there to walk through everything with me in such a way so that when I entered into marriage, and Katie and I both, we both got married as virgins. We didn't have like prior experience, but we weren't like blown away with this, like, what? Like, I thought it was this, or I thought it was that. And like you said, it seems like I hear about a lot of bitterness from people that maybe are angry at the purity culture or angry at their more conservative upbringing. And then they go into marriage and they've got a twisted perspective or they've got a faulty perspective. And that's certainly not been our experience at all.
No, obviously, when neither of you have had any experience sexually, it's funny and it's awkward and there's embarrassing moments, and it's stuff that we look back on and laugh at now. Mm-hmm. But to me, it was only a beautiful thing of being able to figure that out together.
Yeah.
And I think we both went into marriage with this concept of sex is awesome. It's a learned skill. You've got to get good at it. We have a lifetime to learn each other and to make this an awesome experience. So if we start off and everything's a little funny and uncomfortable and embarrassing, that's okay. Like that's being married to someone for the first time.
Yeah, that was expected. Like that was definitely expected.
So we have those expectations, which I think were healthy, but we also had these expectations and perspectives that sex within a marriage is something that is worth working towards having a very active, healthy, joyous sex life.
Yes.
And it's not something to fade once you get married or, that kind of like gets lame. It's something that can continually get more and more and more enjoyable as you learn your, lifelong partner. Like How cool is that? You could really become experts of each other.
Yeah. And I think both of our parents gave us that vision without.
I didn't get it from anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, there might have been Christian voices that I would hear speak highly of it. But of course, secular media is going to have a distorted perspective on it, and they're going to communicate a distorted, mostly sinful perspective on sex. And then much of even the Christian culture had a very depressing view on it, I think. And so I do think that our parents both did a really good job of, without being, overly descriptive, just talking about the subject loosely in a positive light. Yes. And then also giving us the expectation that it's going to be a learning curve. And I think both of our parents told us that. And so we went in being like, okay, this is an awesome thing to pursue. Just like you got to figure out how to do so many things in life together when you're newlywed, do a budget together and, raise kids together. It's like, this is worth investing time and energy into getting better at. Yeah.
Something that I think that the world is so focused on is mechanics, and they've really reduced sex to mechanics. This is how you do X, Y, and Z. This is how you do it this way, whatever. And it's interesting because I was also reading another book last night that spawned our conversation about this whole sexual thing. And it's a great book. It's by Jody Maccabee. I'd love to have her on the podcast about the, what is it called? The Whole and Healthy Family or something. It's really good. But she had an excellent chapter in there that spawned a lot of discussion for us about pornography and how to talk to our kids about pornography, and about sex. Obviously, that was in there too. And she brought up this concept of at what age she introduced kind of the mechanics of sex to her children. And it just made me remember, when I was younger, I didn't know the mechanics of sex until I think I was 12 when my dad sat me down and my mom, and they were there together and explained as much as I needed to know at the time, because I wasn't going to go out and do it, how sex happened. But that wasn't what I refer to as my sexual education. The mechanics are such a small part of sex, and they're important, but at the end of the day, my dad grabbing my mom from behind or kissing her, or, reading in Genesis and being they were naked and unashamed and it was good. It was very good, just adding his little comments here and there. I knew my parents, they liked each other. I knew they liked sex. I didn't know what it all entailed, but I knew it was fun and awesome in marriage. And I got that by how my parents had this fun, playful relationship and loved each other and showed that love to us in healthy physical ways, by making out and grabbing each other and stuff like that. And then also knowing that they liked having getaways and they liked being behind closed doors. And I think that there's so much more to sex than just the mechanics that our children need to know.
Yeah, there's so much more to the sexual education than just, you said, teaching the mechanics, because if anything, it's oftentimes the subliminal messages that actually have the most impact in your life. The things
way more is caught than taught in this.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at popular narrative around sex, I know growing up, in movies and books and articles and stories that you would hear, even again from Christian people, there would be the height of romance and sex. It's it was just this declining thing starting from the day of marriage, right? Even in a more from a secular narrative, it'd be the sex and the passion leading up to marriage was just this whirlwind of emotion and ecstasy and just so much fun. And then the marriage starts, and that's always kind of the end of the good times.
Yeah,
right?
You want the movie to turn off after they get married. It's happily ever after, moving on. You aren't even that interested in their love life afterwards because you just know it's not going to be that great.
Yeah, so isn't that nuts that that's the perspective that Hollywood would portray?
Yeah.
is that right there. Like I said, this obviously has drifted into Christian narrative as well. And our parents showed us a far different narrative, which I think is powerful. And it's so powerful that we've got the opportunity to give that perspective to our children and to also understand that we're going to be combating another narrative. We're going to be combating a far more sinful, like you said, distorted narrative and perspective on sex and sexuality. So just explaining the mechanics, that's needs to be done at some point, with your children, but you are going to be exemplifying and telling your children about sex by your attitude around it, and the small, like you said, the small comments made here and there, the flirtatious remarks made, towards one another. And I think that that's a really good insight, Katie, because with so many things, we want to check boxes. Like we just want to say, okay, we covered this, and this. We had the pornography talk, we had the homosexuality talk, we had all these talks about the things they might encounter. And so we're good to go. When in reality, they're probably what's going to have the strongest and most long lasting impact in their life is what they're witnessing between you and I.
Yeah. I mean, if they're seeing their parents that don't seem to like each other or have fun or flirt, like, why would they think that's something to look forward to in marriage?
Yes.
Like, I think that honestly, watching my parents and wanting a marriage that was fun and spunky and spicy like their marriage was, that I could even tell from the outside, took away that scarcity mindset when it came to my teen years and thinking like, well, this is like when the getting's good. Yes. You know what I mean? Like, this is when my emotions are high, my hormones are high, the romance is high. And like, I just need to have sex now, like despite how healthy it is or what God says about it or all these things. I really felt like healthy sex in marriage was worth waiting for.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, I don't know. It was worth building and crafting and creating in marriage. Sometimes I hear too from people who are burnt out from, people reference purity culture, and maybe they thought it was just going to all fall into place in marriage. And that's not something that I feel like I was told either. It was like anything worth having is worth working towards. And so it's worth working towards with your lifelong partner. It doesn't mean that it's just going to be all easy right off the bat and this fabulous experience like maybe Hollywood said it would be or something like that. But it doesn't mean that you can't make it glorious.
Yes.
And so anyways, I really think though that when you picture, okay, I have a whole life to have incredible sex and to work towards that, you aren't as nervous about not getting it right now.
Yeah, you said you said the scarcity attitude. I think that's a good word for it. You don't have this scarcity mindset in your teen years and in your young adult years when you're not married. And what was I going to say? Maybe it'll come back to me. Who knows? Maybe it won't.
Maybe it won't. Yeah. Okay, so I just kind of want to go through, I guess I wrote down stages of when my parents talked to me when I felt like, kind of like how they educated me sexually. Mm-hmm. And I'm a generation behind our children. So we need to be like more on top of it with our children, like younger. I feel like my parents pretty much hit the nail on the head with every developmental thing with me.
Yes.
I didn't feel very left in the dark, except I was 19, I was writing a college speech, and I went in to have a proctored speech where someone's going to sit there and listen to me give the speech. And the speech that I got on the paper was on whether condoms should be handed out to kids in grade school or not.
Yeah.
And I told the lady, I was like, okay, I am guessing by the context what a condom is, but I actually don't know. And so I don't feel comfortable giving a speech on this subject matter because I don't feel like I'm familiar enough with it. And she was just so embarrassed for me and like mortified. And I went home to my mom and I was like, okay, hello, I am 19. Why am I in this this experience?
You were one of 11 kids, so clearly condoms, maybe they didn't know about them either. I was one of 10 kids, and I don't think I think I knew about them a little younger than that. But that's something, though, anyways. Before you move on, like, I can objectively say I was and am naive and ignorant on so many things regarding sex.
Yes.
It's like that was just it's a fact. It was a fact then. And like I said, it's probably a fact now. Like
it is.
I
and
still
it's a healthy
will
thing.
like hear jokes or, euphemisms. I'm like, boy, don't know. Like, and I'm, that's not a bad thing. I don't think. Like,
no, we aren't supposed to know about every weird, strange thing out there. We're supposed to know what is God's design for sex and what applies to that. And we don't need to know about every twisted variation of that.
Yeah. And so like, were there a few times, and I'm really just a few times where, I was made fun of in the locker room because I didn't know what an expression meant or what something was that they were talking about. Like, yeah, that happened, but I never was like angry at my parents or like, there was this clear worldview that I had that was like, okay, you go back to being Christians. We're a peculiar people. We're a royal priesthood. We're a holy nation. We are set apart. Now, knowledge in certain areas doesn't then make you not set apart. But I do want my children to have a level of naivety and ignorance regarding the various, gross customs of the world. Like I don't want them to be fully aware and educated. Like, do I want them to have a healthy fear and knowledge? Yeah, but just like men are inventors of really evil, twisted things, and I can't keep up with them. Like, I don't want to try to have my kids keep up with them either. Hey everyone, I want to take a quick moment to tell you about our online music academy called VotebergMusicAcademy.com. Katie and I actually started this online music academy 7 years ago, and over that time we've been able to see thousands of students go through our courses and learn how to play the guitar, the mandolin, the fiddle, the piano, the ukulele, and bring music into their home. And we really curated these lessons so that you're able to learn with your child or you're able to learn by yourself and then bring music into your home and play with your kiddos. We even have it so that you can, subscribe to one course and have 3 of your kids take the same course. So it's really cost effective and you're able to go at your own pace and bring music into your home. Go to VotebergMusicAcademy.com and check this out. Okay, listen up. This is where it gets really good. If you enter the coupon code YouTube at checkout, you will get 10% off each month's payment because it's a subscription. It's a reoccurring payment. So if you put that code in, then it's 10% off each month. So, that can really add up over time. So bring some music into your family's home. Go over to VotebergMusicAcademy.com. I'll link it below. And you guys put in that coupon code and go learn how to play some piano, guitar, fiddle, mandolin, ukulele, your choice. Or have that be a goal. And
you mentioned too, again, a perspective around all of this matters so much because you mentioned, not knowing what things meant in a locker room. And Elisha and I both played public school sports despite being homeschooled. And that would happen all the time where I had no clue what the girls were talking about. But to me, it really was like, in my mind, I'm not thinking like, oh, I wish I knew that. And then I could be in the conversation. To me, it was very clear, this doesn't apply to me. They're all sexually active. They're all experiencing this. I'm not. I'm saving that aspect of my life for later in my life. So this doesn't apply to me right now in my stage of life, and it's not helpful for me. And so it wasn't something I was bummed out that I didn't know about. Yes. I was just like, this isn't my stage of life. And I don't know, maybe that's a little black and white, but it wasn't hard for me to feel like I was left out. I was left out of a lot of conversations in high school, and they just didn't apply to me. Like I also wasn't doing drugs in high school. I also wasn't drinking in high school. There are a lot of things. I mean,
you're not doing that much these days either.
Not much these days. But you know what I mean? Like there's just certain things that don't apply to you.
Yes.
And that's okay to be left out. And honestly, that's, like you said, as a Christian, that's a very healthy thing that should happen throughout all our adult lives too. There's things that shock me all the time that I hear.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's a thing.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think that the only reason that wasn't a huge hindrance is the whole peer pressure thing, or fitting in or not fitting in, or being made fun of. Like you said, you had already had a vision for sex at that point. You're like, I know what I don't know what they're talking about because I don't need to know. Like I will learn about all those things when the time's right for me and when it's fitting for me to learn those things. And so I think I had that same perspective of not feeling left out or not feeling embarrassed. Yeah. So I don't know how that, cause I mean, I'm sure it was probably different for it's different for every kid, but I think you want your kids to have a holistic worldview, and you want it to be centered in Christ and as a Christian first and foremost. And so when they do not know things, or when they're on the outskirts, that needs to be a muscle that's flexed early and often, because we're told, I mean, you go back again to, the children of Israel, they were clearly a set apart people, and their customs were different. Their routines, their habits were different. Their diet was different. And now as Christians, the same goes for us. Like, the same language is used for the church. I already said the peculiar people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Like, we are a different people. We are a unique people, a peculiar people. And so you're going to see that in things like your sexual education. You're going to see that obviously in your sexual activity and behavior as well. Yeah.
And I think too, like, this isn't the first time that Christians have had a different sexual ethic. I don't even know what the appropriate word is for, than everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, that is the standard. Like, you go to other countries and they have like child brothels, or the temple worship involves like the temple prostitute girls, or like, there's been so many things, and are so many things, and will continue to be so many things that are outside God's design for sex. And those are always going to be a thing. So like, I don't think we need to be shocked as parents that those are the norm now in our generation, in our culture. Those have always been the norm in generations and cultures where God is not king of the Lord. God is not Lord of those people's lives, and therefore their lives look different, and our children's lives will look different. And I think of, something that does help just in a practical way. One, being a teen with a strong walk with the Lord.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is number one, because at the end of the day, it wasn't my parents, it wasn't my siblings, it wasn't what other people thought of me on one side or another that was affecting my decision-making at that point in time. It was truly God.
Yeah.
My fear of him.
That has to be it, because you can only keep your kids within the boundaries and within the guidelines for so long. And maybe they aren't sexually active with other people, but they're finding pornography, or they've got weird, distorted thoughts. Like, you've got to be able to disciple them in beyond just this area of sexuality, their overall character, their heart for their Lord, their faith. Like,
yeah, it's all tied together. It's not one area. And so I think but something else that, just like on a practical note, was really helpful was, both of us had a lot of friends that were Christians and that believed the same thing. And so that was really helpful when you had peers that were maybe pressuring you another way. You had a peer group that was also supporting you in that.
Yeah.
And so that's really helpful through those harder years of making those decisions sexually.
Yeah, that's actually so good for me to remember, because like and I'm sure a lot of people experience this when you become a parent and an adult, is like, you forget what peer pressure feels like, and you forget how significant of a role that plays in your decision-making when you're a teenager and when you're in adolescence, because it's like, now, what are we, 32? And it's like, I just care what you think. And like, I know what I believe. And if people think I'm dumb for not partaking in something, like, it rolls off my shoulders so much quicker and easier.
And also your peer group is so much bigger. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we could pick the friends at our church or
Yes, exactly.
Like, as adults, you have like this huge peer group to be like, oh, we're like-minded, let's be friends.
Exactly. So if somebody does poke fun at me, it's like, okay, I'm probably just not really going to hang out with you anymore.
Like,
I've got other options, buddy, and I can go, like you said, have fellowship with like-minded believers. But it is crazy how quickly I've forgotten, like, being 10 and 12 and 14 and 15 years old and hearing people tease you or make fun of you or think something's cool, and really that playing a huge role in your decision making.
Yeah.
Like, and I need to remember that with my children. Like, our children are so not, going to be above the effects of peer, anything. But like, what I'm talking about is they're not going to be above the effects of peer pressure. And so being ultra aware of who their peers are and having those open lines of communication, it just starts now, even just like Leon caring how he looks, like, depending on who's going to be at like a Bible study, you know?
Yeah,
It's
our 3-year-old
Yeah.
he told me today, he got out his pants that were his cool pants because they had a rip in them. I'm like, where did you
Yes.
decide that pants that had a rip in them were cool?
Yeah.
You know, it's just funny.
Yes. And
to
something
see.
else that you and I were talking about last night is that I think it's like our kids, we love our kids, we're going to disciple them, but the Bible says that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And that just goes, I think you can say that's just children in general. Like our children are not exempt from that rule. And so therefore it's not just going to be outside influences and peers that can bring bad thoughts, ideas, actions into our home. Like they are, you know, people have talked about the human heart being an idol factory, where it's like they have the capability in and of themselves to pursue these things and to want to seek these things out. And I think for the longest time, I thought my children were exempt and we just need to protect them from outside influences. But it's like, no, we also need to protect our children from themselves and from their sinful nature and teach them the gospel and teach them about the victory that is in Christ and about the, you know, inclinations of their heart, not always and very rarely being something to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Your feelings and your emotions and your heart are worth squat when it comes to what the right thing to do is
Yes.
in the moment. And that's not what they're going to hear from the mainstream.
Yes.
So I think like just with baby steps, okay, I'm going to go over my history, okay? Because we're kind of doing this a little bit with our kids.
Okay.
Like the first thing we addressed with our children, which was the first thing that I remember my parents talking to me about, was basically protecting yourself and protecting your own private parts and from molestation. And that's just such a huge thing. And like, praise the Lord, like I never had to experience that, but that's a majority of kids these days, which is kind of crazy. And so something that my dad was really good about was sitting us all down. And again, my mom was always there. My dad always was I say my dad though, because he was always the one that communicated these things. My mom was there for like emotional support, but she got a little more like flustered about these topics. And daddy just was the one who could kind of treat them more like scientific and realities of life. Yeah, exactly. So he would sit us down before big family reunions, before church events, like church camps, before Christian, like any Christian group. And it always like annoyed me. By the time I was like 10 or 11 years old, I was like, this is like my family. Like, why are you going to sit us down now and say, hey, if anyone comes up to you, even if it's your uncle or your aunt, and they ask you to pull your pants down, you know, what do you say? You say no, and you leave the situation and you immediately come to daddy and mama. And what if they say, you know, they're going to hurt you or they're going to hurt your parents? What do? You do the same thing. It doesn't matter. And, but like, now that I'm an adult and you know all the statistics on who's the most likely to harm your children, it's the people you trust and it's the environments you trust. And so those are the times to prepare our kids for these things. And especially, I think it's the easiest for people to hide out in those kinds of environments.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're going to be like on major guard if you're at the fair or something,
Sure.
you know, for
Yes.
like a kidnapper or whatever. But you aren't when your kid's just, you know, off in another room with a relative.
Yes.
Or you're at a church function. Like church functions are great places for weird people to hang out because everyone's kind of all under this blanket of God and holiness, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And your kids are comfortable. They're running to the bathroom maybe without telling you. I mean, that's something that we've like really made a rule with our kids. Like, man, do not go to the bathroom by yourself. You know, like we want to be able to go with you. And yet that can happen. So we learned that from them doing it a handful of times by themselves. Just kind of like, where were you? Oh, I went to the bathroom. Like by yourself? Yeah. And you're kind of like, and then you're like, okay, was anybody else in the bathroom with you? You know, and you're trying to get the whole debrief. And kids are comfortable in those situations and then adults can hide. Yeah. It's like,
so things can happen peer to peer in those environments or adult to child in those environments. And you just want to prepare your kid. Like, so if they come into that situation, they don't know like is this normal?
Yeah.
Because children are trying to figure out all the time, like what's normal, what's not. And when it's someone that they trust or in an environment they trust, they're going to think like, well, maybe I just haven't experienced this, but this is a normal thing.
Yes, because they're learning new things every single day.
Yeah.
They're learning about life. And so that's the classic, like vulnerable, like they are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something from like 2-3 years old, as soon as they can communicate and be out of your sight for a few minutes. Something that we've talked to our kids about, and something that we'll continue talking to our kids about is just, and then also having an open door policy at our home and at other friends' home, because our kids, again, are not above the whole just like little kid exploration and curiosity of the other sex or same sex or whatever. Everything's all new and exciting. And so we just keep bedroom doors open when friends are over, and when we're over at friends, bedroom doors are open. And that's just something that's really important for us at this young stage. That's the earliest I remember my parents kind of talking about sexuality, was kind of what could go wrong. And they didn't go into detail on what could happen to me. It was just, if any part of your body is showing that isn't currently showing now with someone else, you need to get out of this situation and come tell daddy and mama what happened.
Yeah.
And then I think the second thing I remember was being talked to about pornography. And if you guys know my dad's testimony and experience with pornography, then this was something that was brought up in our home a lot. If not, that's linked down below. Elisha did an episode with him on kind of his journey to finding freedom from that. But that was something that he really wanted to protect us from, and knew because of his experience, just how easy that can be to access. And that's something that we were just having a conversation last night, how we haven't talked to our kids about that. And we feel like we need to have that conversation right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's one that I don't want to wait another day. I mean, we'll probably talk tonight about it, like when I'm laying the boys down or something. And again, I'm new to this, so I don't know how these conversations are going to go, but I do know I want to present it in a way where they're not like, boy, I hope we never have to talk about that again.
Yeah.
And they just kind of like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, Dad, okay. And then they're like, the last guy we're gonna tell if we ever see anything is that guy. And so I want to present it in a way that's, there's dialogue. It's lighthearted, not in a flippant way, but just in a matter of fact way. Just kind of like, hey, this is going to happen.
And I remember it was encouraging for me, even as a young girl, to have my dad explain, like obviously I wasn't a boy, and I know that pornography can be a big struggle for women as well. That was not something that I personally struggled with, so I couldn't really relate to that specific struggle. But I could understand, I could appreciate that when Daddy presented it, and my parents did this together, again, it was it's a natural thing for a healthy male to desire a woman's body.
Yeah. And
I felt comfort in that as a younger girl, not feeling like, okay, this is a perversion from what God has designed. But the drive that's there is stemming from a design that God has designed.
Yes.
And so it didn't, I guess, gross me out or weird me out to think that my brother or my dad or my husband might be attracted to some other woman's naked form or half-clothed form or whatever it is. And it's brought me comfort as a wife to know, you know what? Like, if our husbands have these fights with lust this way, that's stemming from something that is a healthy design. It's just a perversion of it.
Yeah.
It's just a twisted version of it. It's a natural fight, I guess, to have.
Yes.
And that brought me comfort as a girl, not like it's this dirty, disgusting thing that like only creepos would, want to see or.
Yeah, well, and I think that's got to be a big part of the conversation with the boys it's not. Yeah, I mean, again, this is all just so real time because I don't want to downplay it, meaning like, oh yeah, everybody, and have this flippant attitude of like, yeah, everybody does it, like you're going to do it, but, repent, move on. Like, I want there to be the sobriety around sin and how it really can, can get a hook in your life and drag you down to hell. Read the Proverbs that are sobering. Like, those do sober you up regarding the adulterous woman.
Proverbs 5 and 7.
Yeah. And of course that is clear. You witness that on a regular basis every day in this life. Like, you witness the truth and the profundity of those proverbs every day. And so it's not like you just have to go point to these, verses in the Bible. It's like, yeah, you know how they talk about it there. Well, let's go ahead and look at all these examples here, today where this is happening. So yeah, finding a way. And again, I don't know how this is going to.
But you feel like, I guess I just want to say, you feel like your dad did a good job of this.
Yeah, I think he did.
Right?
I think he did because, and this is kind of, I think the difference probably, and maybe it's my style or your style, or it might be a man and a woman's difference is like my expectation for my boys is to start this conversation and to not end this conversation. Does that make sense? Like I'm not necessarily looking at all these check boxes or these boxes to check.
I'm just saying as I was like my first exposure to certain things.
Yeah. And I think it's good
that make sense?
To think of those things. And I think it's good to remember your experience and to try to put yourself back in those, put yourself back in your shoes at that age. But my expectation is to start the conversation and for it to not end, it's for it to go on and on and on because their bodies are going to change. Their minds are going to change. What they're exposed to is going to change. And I want to be as proactive on what they're exposed to as I can be, but I also want to know I'm not going to be able to know everything they're exposed to. Does that make sense? So it's like, I want to be vigilant. I want to be the watchdog of my home. I want to, have computers out in the open places. I want to keep them away from smartphones. I want to, guard their eyes when we can. But my parents did that to me and I still saw the stuff. Like we had a very protected home and it was and it was with like, a fraction of the technology that we have access to now. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I was a sheltered kid and I still saw this. I still saw stuff and, not just like as a victim, like I was able to go seek stuff out. Right. I think it's always easy to be like, oh man, like you're a victim and you came across it. It's like, no, I'm fully expecting my boys to, from a sinful desire to go seek this stuff out. Does that make sense? Like, maybe I shouldn't expect that, but like, I am like, I was brought up in a great Christian home and I came to places where it's like, I want to see this, I want to look at that and I want to, and so I would seek it out. And so I don't want to be blown away when that's the reality in our home. And I do want to set up guardrails and have it, because obviously it's one thing to see it once or twice or to be exposed to it. But if they get deep down a thread of addiction, and that's way harder to work yourself back from. And of course there's freedom from all of that. And like the Lord can free anybody from anything.
But it really affects your relationships.
But I'd rather have the conversation often and frequently, like my dad did, I guess, where it wouldn't go, years with, and down this rabbit trail of habit of habitual sin. Like he gave me the opportunity regularly to confess and to, come clean and be like, oh my goodness, yes.
Could you touch on the difference of kind of like your physical sin at times and then like pornography and how your dad treated those things different?
As far as like masturbation and then like looking at things?
Yeah. Because that was insightful to me. Again.
Yeah. It's hard retrospectively to remember how this all worked out, but clearly the sexual drive, especially when you're an adolescent, is just, that's a healthy part of development. And it's not that my dad ever excused it, but he also explained what that was. Does that make sense? Like he explained the natural expression or the holy and healthy expression of that and what that was for, and then what the unhealthy expression of that was for. And, again, it's one, so it's like, okay, you've got a 13 or a 14-year-old struggling with this and you're like, well, yeah, just got to get married. And it's like, well, come on, I'm 13. How am I going to, get married? And so it wasn't like he was saying that. I think he taught self-control. He taught freedom from sin, and he taught, bringing it to the Lord, confessing your sin, not living with the weight of your sin, this guilty conscience. Cause it just weighs heavy on you. And then eventually that becomes a seared conscience, which is a dangerous place to get to.
Because you have to numb it in order to just keep moving on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're not as sensitive.
Exactly. So, I guess
there was
in general, in general, he, I would confess, masturbation, and he would treat that matter-of-factly, kind of explain. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll repent. But then on the flip side, he was like hardcore about the dangers of pornography. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was like, this is not okay.
Like do not mess with that. Does that make sense? Like this stuff, and that's where he brought me to the verses. Like this will destroy your soul. And again, I don't know if I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. I'm just saying that's the way my dad did it with me, where there was this distinction of like, yeah, you should repent about masturbation and that, but then also know that like there is a healthy, outlet for that. Whereas sin is never satisfied. There's not a healthy expression of sin. And pornography you could get addicted. It's got there's a chemical thing happening, that is really dangerous. And so he gave me a healthy fear of pornography. Does that make sense? Not to the point where it's like, I never want to talk to my dad about this because he freaks out, but it was just this sober, like, listen to me.
Do whatever you can to not go there.
This is how strong men are destroyed. And the Bible makes it abundantly clear. It's like, this is what brings men of God, men of character. This destroys them, destroys their life. So I don't know. Yeah.
So anyways, I thought that was an interesting distinction when you told me, obviously not having been like a boy, and we've got 3 boys. Yeah. I'm like, I feel like Elisha's experience in his relationship, his ability to be able to communicate with his dad and all those things really has been helpful for me. And honestly, just Elisha and I having these conversations over the years have been very helpful in me knowing as a woman a little bit more like one guy's experience of what to expect when our boys go through adolescence. And obviously our daughter's going to go through adolescence, but I experienced that to a point. So that's not as scary to me. Like our boys really kind of freak me out, and it's gotten less and less that way the more Elisha and I have communicated, and the more I've been like, what? Like that was your experience, or that was the age where that happened? Or, I was able to kind of be shocked a little bit with my husband instead of having it be my sons. So I feel like I'm in a lot healthier place to when my boys are going through these things to be able to be level-headed and non-emotional and kind of know like, okay, this comes with the territory instead of like, what is going on? And it's going to be different for different kids. I'm not saying that, but like, like I've had like, it's been hard for me to hear some of the stuff sometimes that you've like shared with me about your growing up experience. Like, because it just seems, again, you're so far away from marriage when you're 11, 12, 13 years old. And so I think the bigger picture too, when it comes to sexual sin, is that sexual sin or sexual temptation, that doesn't go away when you're married. Like the Lord gave this beautiful outlet for a couple to be unified and to enjoy this, but self-control and putting boundaries in place for yourself and, just different brain pathways that are there, and all those things are still there when you're married, right?
Yeah,
you know what 100%.
I mean? We've talked about this a handful of times. I think it is incumbent upon husbands and fathers to lead out in this conversation.
Yeah.
And, even you referencing this woman and their book, it's just so funny how my brain, it's like, okay, like I'm sure it's a great book and I'm sure she's awesome, but I do not want our sons to hear stuff from you. I think it's my responsibility. And yes. I think that men can relate with men. And I don't know how many times in small group environments, women, make a fool of themselves by speaking up and explaining their husband's battle with lust or anything, thinking they understand it and they know how this all works. And all the men are just kind of sitting there thinking like, what are you talking about? Women just don't see it the same way men do. And they don't experience it the same way men do. And so as a result, men need to have the conversation with their sons. And I think men don't because they're living in shame, they're living in guilt, and they're not walking in freedom. So they're kind of like, well, just sure, I'll let her take care of it. And it's another area that we've, abdicated the responsibility and we've been passive. And women, as the problem solvers, are like, oh, it's great. I read a book about this. If we tell them about pornography then, and then they see this, and they're going to be great. And men know it's this ongoing journey. And they've got to be the ones as the forerunners in their home. That's how I see it. Like, I do not see it being effective or healthy. I see it undermining the man's authority and his confidence when the woman leads out in these conversations. And so again, It is a shame that men don't lead out in these conversations. It is. And I think it's because I know this has been the experience in my life. When you're living in guilt and you've got hidden sin and you're not walking free in this area of life, you're thinking, who am I to talk on this? Who am I to talk to my sons or to lead out in our home? But it's like, man, that's your responsibility. Repent first and foremost for yourself, find freedom in the Lord, come clean of your sin, and then lead out in your home and lead out in these conversations, because it's unfitting and it's inappropriate for the women to be leading out in these conversations.
Go, Elisha. I like that. I mean, I'm glad you're the dad of our boys. That's encouraging. And I do feel that way. I don't feel any pressure or any responsibility to have these conversations with our sons. Even last night, me bringing my thoughts to you, that's kind of how I see this going. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Being like, I read this. I feel like we need to talk to our sons about pornography. What do you think about that? And you were like, yeah, you're right. I think that they're younger than what I would have assumed we would have this conversation, but I think it's time to have the conversation. And I do see that being super, super healthy.
Yes. Well, I do want to say, I don't think that the women need to be excluded from the conversation.
No.
I want there to be an open line with you and me. And I'm gone a lot of days. I want you to come to me and say, hey, I heard Leon say this to so-and-so. I think the kids mentioned this or whatever. I want that to be something where we're on the same page with. Yes. I'm not saying
and I know I'm not excluded from it. We don't have this line down the center of our home and it's Elisha and the boys. And then I've got Lucy. It's Elisha and I, and then our kids, but he's the one that's going to do the communication.
I want to be out there having the conversations, having the talks with my boys and with my daughters for that matter.
Yeah. And I loved, honestly, it gave me a lot of security that my dad was there in those conversations about, my period and all these things, my hormones changing. It gave me, I think, this healthy view of this father figure or masculinity in general, where I didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable when it came to my husband, getting to know, me as a woman. I felt safe and protected and cared for. And I think that that's something that very few girls can relate with too, is feeling like they have that genuine protection and care coming from their father. And that does translate when it comes to a marriage. Yep. You're able to feel that, be more vulnerable and open and feel like you're going to be protected and cared for and not have to have all these walls up because of what happened growing up. Yeah. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And I feel like Lucy already feels that way with you, and we want to keep that going as she gets older. Yes, definitely. Exactly. And I want to be the haven of security and of safety and of, confiding, yeah. And I know you do too. I don't want there to be this. Deal. Like you're saying, Elisha and I need to have this open conversation, but because I am the mom and I am in the home, I have stumbled upon things that relatives close to me have watched. And I've been the first, oh my goodness, this is on the computer history on so-and-so's computer. And I need to go tell someone about this. And so I know that there's a good chance that our kids' exposure to things will potentially come through me first. Yes. And so that's what I'm saying when I was referring to, your experience with pornography or your experience with masturbation or something like that. I think it's healthy for the mom to still be aware of ages of things or what her boys might go through or the physical things that they might go through and not be grossed out by it, but be able to be matter of fact about it. Yeah. In a way that they communicate with their husband and in the way that it helps you. I think it will help how I view my adolescent sons. Yes. Instead of being like, wow, this is a lot for me, being like, okay, you know what, this is okay. Because obviously Elisha's going to communicate with me where they're at too. Yes. We're on the same page with raising our boys. Yeah. We're on the same team. We are a team on this unit. I just don't want, I think in general, but I'm not going to be having conversations with them about their sexuality. It's not that you're not allowed to have conversations. I just want to be the one leading out and taking responsibility in this area of our home and discipleship. Just like I want to take responsibility in all aspects of, discipleship. The man does own the responsibility, but then, obviously the wife and the woman we're co-laborers, in the same, with the same desired outcome. I just think for my
tiny little, glimpse into other people's lives, it seems like women feel so comfortable explaining how everything's going to work.
Yes.
And being like, well, yeah, it was a problem, but then we got this, and this, and now everything's all good. And just like, I don't know, as the man, and I think all just kind of like, well, you like literally have no clue what you're talking about, And so I want that because, and again, I think men abdicate because they're living in sin. Probably that's 100% how it's been for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if a man tries to explain a woman's cycle or her hormones, a woman's not going to take that super well. Like, well,
Yes.
like you're an expert.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like there's certain parts of our body makeup where they can know a lot of things scientifically or on paper, but at the end of the day, it's not the same thing as having gone through it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of like how you would say it?
Yeah.
Here I go trying to explain something that I probably have no idea.
No, it's not like it's
about.
that trivial and profound. I just think, you know what I think.
I do.
I think the
I do
men and
know
the
what you
husbands and the
think.
fathers should lead out in this conversation, and it should be earlier than what we think it should be probably, and it should be often, it should be frequent, it should be open, and
And your dad did that with you.
yes.
And I'm really grateful for that. And I feel like both my parents did that with me, and I'm grateful for that in a different way. And again, it's not like these women, our daughters won't have struggles either with masturbation or things like that either, that maybe we didn't personally experience or something like that. I know
Yes.
that there's a lot of things out there that maybe wasn't my personal story that our kids are going to have to navigate.
Yeah, it still blows my mind sometimes when I'll talk to parents that will, I think, still seem, and I probably seem naive with what my kids are exposed to. I probably am on some level. It's like we've talked to parents. There's like, oh yeah, we're so grateful. Our kids are 12 and 14 and 10, and they've got zero interest in sex stuff, and like never been a problem, and like. It's like we talk to them
Let's say like sex stuff, like zero interest in girls or zero interest in boys or zero.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh man, they're just not telling you anything. Like you've got to.
We both kind of look at each other like, all right, maybe they aren't talking to you. Yeah. I think this is what we can be confident of in parents, as parents.
Okay, here we go. Let's go.
Okay, you guys ready for this? Is we don't know what our kids know.
Yes.
100% of the time.
Yes.
So we can't say like, I was having a conversation with another parent and they're like, well, the thing is I know what my kid's been exposed to because I'm really in tune. It's like, yeah, that's the problem right there. Like any intentional parent feels like they're in tune, and so therefore they feel like they should know.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean we do. And it doesn't matter. Like if our kid has been with another kid for 5 minutes and we haven't seen them, we don't know what has been said, what has been done, what is going on in their little minds based off that one interaction that we did not know about.
Yep.
And we control every other aspect of their lives. So I think all that we can be confident in is we don't know what they've been exposed to. And so we can just prepare them as best as we can.
Yep.
But not preparing them should not be an option.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Yeah, it's just, you're so right. That is probably like a consistent downfall, because I know it would be what I would fall into it's probably a consistent downfall of intentional parents, is this assumption of like, well, no, I'm intentional. Yeah. I know when they're on the screen. I know when they're not on the screen, or they're screen free, or like I know exactly who they're with at church. I know exactly what they're doing at their grandparents' house. It's like, well, actually, yes. Like that is the problem.
Yeah. And it's like, and guess what? Your parents thought that about you too. Yeah. And what did you know that they didn't know?
Yeah.
Because was there anything? Probably.
Yes.
So anyways, I just think that's something that we can be confident in. And then I will say, okay, so just like I know I'm going through my little progression that's different than your thing, but this is two different people's perspectives, okay?
We are a team on this, Katie. We are going to work through this.
We better be a team. And then I will say, okay, so the next thing, so after me being 12 years old, got the mechanics explained vaguely, and then all I knew is like after that, through my teen years, up until getting engaged, was sex is really awesome inside of marriage. There's this total blessing in it. But anything outside of God's design is sin, and anything that is sin brings death and ultimately does not satisfy. And so that was just something I knew. Everything else fell in that category for me. And it was just kind of this like, I don't go there.
Yes.
Because I knew that I wanted this joyful, fulfilling marriage one day. And it's not saying that those other things didn't mean that I wouldn't have a joyful, fulfilling marriage one day sexually, but an element of death was going to be present, an element of separation of God was going to be present, and just sin. And so just like any other sin that separates us from God and doesn't lead us towards righteousness, doesn't make us more holy, that wasn't something that I wanted to participate in, just straight up on that level. So I would say that's just up until Elisha and I were engaged. That was just my view of sex. I didn't know any more ways of how it was done or how it wasn't done or whatever. I didn't get a whole lot more knowledgeable other than like basic intercourse that was explained to me at 12. And then when I was engaged, that's when my mom pulled me aside. And that was the first conversation I ever had with my mom on her own. My dad was not present. And that was where we talked a lot about specifics. And I was able to, she's like, what questions do you have? Like, and at that point I'd heard about a lot of things. And so I was kind of like, okay, what about this? What about this? What was your experience with this? Is this like, this seems kind of weird. Is that natural? Is that unnatural? And was able to go through specifics with her, which was a huge blessing. And then I was also able to talk about sexual pleasure and how can you promote that both for yourself and for your husband, and how can you work towards that? What are things that can help in that way? And so we went over a lot of stuff in that, because I think that's something that maybe people don't talk about either, is they talk about, okay, mechanics of sex, but you can go through sex and have it be painful and not very much fun. Yeah. You know what I mean? Or it can be like this incredible experience. And so talking about how to increase the sexual pleasure in your relationship, even though I had no experience, was really helpful for me and gave me something to aim for. And as Elisha and I got married, after we got married, it was something to like, a lot of things would pop into my head at different times based on that conversation.
Wait, like you had your mom's voice in your head all those times?
Yeah. My mom's voice would just come to my mind. It was super romantic. No, but it would be helpful for different situations. Like I didn't have to have experience to kind of store that information away and be able to pull it out postpartum, be able to pull it out, you know, at different seasons of life and be like, oh, this is applicable to this season in my life right now. And it was really helpful to be able to talk with her and to continue talking with her. That really opened up a line of communication with my mom that I was able to maintain into marriage and bring her questions that I had, and obviously keeping the privacy of our marriage, but then being able to be like, ask her questions that I had or things that came up. And so that was really helpful because I feel like that established a bond right there where I felt like I had an advocate of someone to go to as a sexual resource.
Yes.
For the rest of my marriage.
Yeah.
So that's been a really big blessing.
Nice.
And then Elisha didn't really get that prepared.
What? Okay.
Did you? That's okay. I should have let you say that.
Well,
I was a little bit more knowledgeable than he was, which is totally fine and leads to a lot of funny conversations that we have now.
Yeah.
But that's something that you maybe wished you were a little bit more prepared for.
Yeah, but it's like
specifics when it came time to actually where it's going to be a part of your life.
Yeah, but even that, it's like, okay, big deal. Like it was a few days of education on the honeymoon, and then you get it figured out. Like, yeah, like our wedding night was not this magical anything. It was anticlimactic, and same goes with our second night of marriage and with our third day of marriage. You know, but it's like, do we have regrets from that?
Absolutely not.
It's like that. Yeah.
And I mean, when you have the perspective, there's nowhere to go but up from here.
Yes.
It like takes all the pressure off because you're like, okay, well, we aren't very good at this. And then 6 years in, say we're pretty good.
Well, based
We
off
have a
where
lot
we
of
started,
fun.
we can only go up. So
Yeah. And then having that perspective of, oh, in another 10 years, I wonder
Yes.
how much more fun we're going to have, and just have that joy and freedom and things that we'll be less embarrassed by, or be able to.
yeah, then also being able to, and this is just like with life in general and with marriage, we talk about this all the time, the ebbs and flows of life and marriage, and any, like you look at any life and one that ends on a high note, you're like, what a impactful life, an amazing life, or an amazing marriage. How impactful. There's dips in every one of those things. It's never this clear line going up, and that'll happen in our sex life. That'll happen in emotional connectedness. That'll happen, in every aspect of life.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate that people will give up when you're in a dip in your marriage and not experience the great high that comes from getting out of that dip. And then it only gets higher, and then it gets higher when you work through those
it could
hardships.
be like a trajectory like this, but with the graph of like,
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
maybe a
Looking
really
like the
big
stock
low
market.
at 10 years or something, right?
Yes. And so it's just so good to remember that in every aspect of our marriage, just kind of like, boy, when you're committed, you get to experience so many more highs than when you're not committed, you don't view it as a covenant, and you bail, or you mentally quit, or you give up when it's a low, and you never get to experience the true satisfaction and joy and that can come. And it might take a long time. It might take way longer than what you want, but it's always so worth it. Anyways, we can probably wrap this thing up. Cameras are starting to die.
That's the signal. Yeah. Anyways, so obviously our kiddos are really young, and we don't know what out of all our listeners, there's got to be a huge variety of who felt prepared, who didn't feel prepared, who different experiences out there. And we are naive in this area. We've never done this before. In 20 years, check back. Our kids will be on the podcast and tell you how we did. But this area, like any other area, we just want to be surrendered to the Lord's leading, be open to his leading, be open to counsel in this area, and know that we do not have it all figured out, and we'll probably have to pivot at different points in time, and just us remaining unified and seeking the Lord on this topic, like everything else.
Amen.
And raising children.
That's right.
Anyways, that's it for today, folks.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.